Well, it's a beautiful morning here in Southern Ohio. Keith and I are getting warmed up. It was about 20 degrees this morning and we're just shaking the chill off, walking around looking at this timber stand improvement we're gonna do today. We got an entire day of work ahead of us, but we're gonna tell you a little bit about what we're about to get into. Here's a mature oak hickory, oak pine stand behind us, and the goal today is to control the mid-story layer. So we're gonna walk through and show you some of the species and size classes we're targeting, but the main goal of this practice is to try to enhance this understory layer where we've got a lot of regeneration we're trying to promote. We're taking a lot of trees out of this mid-story and trying to promote the understory, and eventually we're gonna harvest this overstory in a series of different harvests and try to let that understory grow into the new forest. We're gonna stroll about here and show you some of the species we're looking at, and then we're gonna get the chainsaws out once our hands get warmed up. Yeah, when we came through and did the inventory plots here, we were seeing a lot of trees in that medium saw timber size class, so pretty big trees, pretty mature trees, and then a lot of trees in this pole timber size class. And a lot of them are not white oak like that. So that's a lot of what we're gonna try to take out of here today. We found a lot of little red maple seedlings, and you can tell they're red maple because they have reddish buds and their buds are opposite. So all your maples are gonna have opposite arranged buds. So in the winter, you get to learn to identify everything by the buds because you don't have leaves to go off of. So you get to get down and really close to these seedlings to try to figure out what you're looking at. I mean, today we're obviously not thinning seedlings out, but we're trying to enhance the seedlings that are here. We've got little red maples and we've got a bunch of oak too. And the best way that I found to try to identify oak seedlings is that you have these big clumps at the end. You see where all those buds come to a clump? There's like 4 or 5 buds. They're all growing like that. Oak is the only genus that's gonna look like that. You know, your maple, like we said, have those opposite buds. And then we have a lot of black gum in here, which is just one singular bud. What we're doing today is gonna be taking out saplings. So we're mainly looking at bark, and Keith and I have looked at thousands of trees. So we're pretty confident on identifying these saplings that we're trying to control. Back behind me, there's sourwood, red maple, black gum, beech, maybe even some smaller hickory are mainly what we're going to be controlling in here. And a lot of those are growing in this mid-story because they're fairly shade tolerant, meaning they can grow under the canopy of these larger trees. We're going in and doing what fire would do. We're just trying to speed the process up. We will eventually use fire in this stand in the near future to try to reset everything and get those oaks to sprout back vigorously. But what we're actually cutting out today, we're going to put herbicide on those stumps to just kill that root system out. That's going to help free up a lot of growing space for a lot of the seedling layer. But we'll come in with fire next year, this fall or something like that, and try to set back that seedling layer and rejuvenate all the oak seedlings and remove a lot of this leaf litter that's been building up for decades. So this is a species of greenbrier. There's a lot of different species. I'm not actually sure which species this is, but greenbrier it's actually a vine, and it's growing with a rhizome root system. So all these greenbrier right here are likely connected by the roots. Actually, here's a good example. The way I look at greenbrier versus multiflora rose, which is a really common misidentification, is when you go walking through greenbrier, these thorns actually don't grab onto you. They're very sharp, but they're not curled. They're really straight and stout thorns. We got a multiflora rose right here that will actually grab you as you go to walk through it, and you have these curled thorns. There's also native roses too, but for the most part in here, we've got multiflora rose, which we've started to spray, and we will continue to try to whittle out of the stand with fire and herbicide. But we're trying to promote greenbrier. It's a native species. It's really common in oak stands, and fire is just going to make that greenbrier resprout with vigor, and it's great deer food. Eventually, when greenbrier climbs up and can get out of the deer browse layer, and if it gets enough sunlight, it'll actually put little berries off, and that'll help feed birds through the winter, birds and squirrels, and if we had any grouse, I'm sure they would eat it too. You've got this haze of greenbrier right here. We're trying to really promote that, and as we knock a lot of this mid-story down, it's going to allow that to climb over all those saplings and get up and out of the understory. So this woods hasn't been grazed for several decades now, and the canopy started to close and allowed that mid-story to grow up. Here's a lot of what we're trying to not allow to happen. This is a little yellow poplar, tulip poplar, not a very shade tolerant seedling, but it's still struggling here in the understory, but it's still taking up growing space from the understory. A couple poplar, there's red maple, there's some black gum seedlings. This is really what we're trying to keep the understory from turning into, is a bunch of saplings of species we don't want. Here and there are a few young oaks, but for the most part, we're getting a lot of these shade tolerant saplings. So we're going in today, trying to take a lot of those out and let those oak seedlings breathe a little bit. So this is one of the larger stems we're going to be targeting today. We're shooting for trees that we're going to call suppressed or intermediate crown position. So this is an intermediate crown position. This tree's fighting for sunlight in the canopy there, but it's not quite making it to the main canopy. It's sitting underneath this pine, and this tree is gonna have to either get a lot of years before it makes it up there, or that pine's gonna have to die and let this tree grow in. Either way, we don't really want a red maple on this site making it to that canopy position, so we're gonna cut her out. We got these little saplings here that we're gonna call the suppressed layer. That's pretty obvious, but there's some beech over here we're gonna go look at, and those are a really good example of suppressed trees that can create a lot of shade and really compete with that understory heavily. So here's our American beech. This is definitely an offender in the upland oak stand. If you look around us, there's no big beech trees, and we're trying to keep this woods from turning into a beech maple woods and trying to promote the oak regeneration. If you look below this beech, there's not many seedlings at all, and there's definitely not a lot of oak seedlings. This one little sapling right here is sucking up a lot of sunlight. Beech have really dense lateral branches. They got a lot of leaves, they create a lot of shade, and they can tolerate a lot of shade. Fire would probably control a beech of this size, but like I said, this timber stand improvement project we're doing, we're gonna go in and we're gonna target stuff down to this size to really make sure that root system gets killed. Fire will only make that thing re-sprout. Maybe after several burns, it might take it out of the stand, but we're just gonna speed that up by cutting and painting a little herbicide on the stump. This is a common mid-story tree in an oak stand, especially if you got a really acidic site. This is sourwood. It never really becomes a canopy tree unless it gets really old. It's honestly a tough one to identify, I think, especially in the winter. What we kind of go off of is the growth form for sourwood. Its bark can look kind of oaky when it's young, and as it gets older, it can kind of confuse you as a sassafras or a chestnut oak or something from a distance. I like to look at the form. You know, you've got this straight tree with these kind of diagonal branches coming off of it. And as Keith pans up, you can see those branches. I'm not great at really explaining how I'm looking at the form. As we look around here, there's a lot of small sourwood like this we're definitely going to try to control. I'm sure today we'll come across a really big one. I know this property has a lot of really big ones. We can show you what a sourwood looks like when it gets really big. You know, we're going to leave a couple of those in the stand. They have, you know, a benefit to pollinators in the late spring, early summer, and they're kind of just a pretty tree, I think. But they definitely get weedy in the mid-story, and we're trying to enhance the oak seedlings here. So this is actually a vine that's pretty much everywhere in southern Ohio, I would say. This is Japanese honeysuckle, or vine honeysuckle. It's nearly evergreen. Like, you'll see this sucker be green. We're here in early December, but this will be green into January or February if it stays warm out. This is a vine, but it kind of creates a ground cover in certain stands. This will just piddle around in the understory and won't really do much unless you give it sunlight. But you get a burn in here, you get a couple burns through here, and it should really whittle a lot of the Japanese honeysuckle out. It's green at the time when, you know, you'd be burning a stand in the dormant season, and it doesn't like fire. Our hope is to use fire to really change the species composition of the understory, and what we're doing today is we're changing the species composition of the sapling layer. A good way to identify Japanese honeysuckle is like the other honeysuckles, are going to have opposite leaves, and it's green and it's December. A lot of your non-natives are going to have different life cycles than your native species. At this point, pretty much all your native species are going to be really turned colors, or they're going to be completely leafless at this point. Japanese honeysuckle is doing just fine. I mean, I don't really know that it's growing too much, but it's at least still green. So we got kind of a unique tree species in this stand, at least for what we're used to. This is a shortleaf pine, so it's in the yellow pine group. The best way that I've been told for identification is it's got these little pitch pockets on the outer bark. And so that's kind of what I'm using to call this a shortleaf pine. We're here in south central Ohio, and we're on the very northern end of this tree's range. And this is one of those that will not regenerate successfully without fire or repeated disturbance. And this one will actually re-sprout after fire. Not a lot of pines are going to do that. I think these are some sprouts working their way from the base of the tree. We've done some burns on the property beside this, and I actually saw some little shortleaf pine seedlings popping up in our 2 years post-burn. So that's pretty cool to see. You know, it creates that seed bed for those seeds to regenerate, and then that fire allows them to open. Really cool tree species. We're obviously going to be leaving something like this in the stand. Pine needles help the stand burn. Pines are obviously adapted, just like oaks, to fire. They have a leaf litter, needles, that promote fire, and probably allow you to burn in the growing season even better than oak leaf litter does. So we got several pines. We're going to leave those and try to grow some baby shortleaf pines over the next couple decades. Here's another really cool tree that has, I think, a pretty good evidence that this was a pretty open stand at one point in the past. This is a post oak, and you'll see it's got all these knots, which were just old branches. This tree was obviously open grown at one point, and these branches have been shaded out over the past couple decades and, you know, became these knots on a tree. Post oak are in the white oak group, and they're pretty slow growing trees. They can grow on a, you know, pretty poor soil, pretty shallow soil, and they're pretty drought tolerant. So a site like this where we've got shortleaf pine, post oak, and several other oaks, it's evident that this is a dry site and that, you know, likely it was open at one point, where all these trees have a lot more open grown form. So that's something we're going to try to promote by thinning and burning, is we're going to try to bring this stand back to a little more of an open woodland state. But here's a post oak leaf, a couple examples. They've got round lobes because they're in the white oak group. The way that I kind of look at post oak leaves is they've got kind of a cross form where you've got two prominent lobes like this, and then the other ones are a little more minor. White oak group, small acorns, and then their growth form is usually just a little more funky and unique than your, you know, regular white oak is. There's some really big ones back here. And then we have, you know, white oak in the stand as well, but just some unique trees we're going to try to promote the regeneration of. So as we go about doing this TSI, we're going to try to drop a lot of these saplings and make sure the tops don't lay up against trees we're going to try to leave for the future. You know, if you pile a bunch of debris like behind me here, if you ran fire through there right now or in the spring, you're going to cook the ground below that. You're going to cook the base of that maple right there. We're going to try to clean a lot of that up for firewood, or at least knock a lot of that down so we don't have really intense fire that hangs around for a long time, like a campfire at the base of trees you're trying to leave, because you'll scar and probably kill the root system of a tree like that. So as we're going about this, we've learned from past experiences that if we don't spend the time doing that while we're doing this TSI, you get to the burn day and you spend a lot of time pulling stuff away from trees, and you can burn up some trees you're not trying to damage. Put a little extra time in now and hopefully save yourself some time down the road. Wrapping up the TSI project here, and this is the last tree we cut. This is a black gum, and it was, you know, one of these mid-story trees, but I was just counting the rings. The last inch of this tree grew in the last 22 years. That's pretty darn slow, but you can see how tight the rings are here. This was a very suppressed tree. I haven't counted them all, but I guess we're gonna probably be close to 70 years old. The sucker's only just over 9 inches in diameter, making room for the bigger ones around it. 75 years. It's pretty wild. Doesn't look like that big of a tree, is it? All right, well, we're gonna go grab the herbicide we've got. We're gonna hit as many of these stumps as we can find. We tried to leave them high so we can go back and find them. The reason we're trying to kill a lot of those is to make room for the seedlings around them and not have a bunch of stump sprouts. I'm sure we'll miss a few, and trees like this black gum will be really good deer browse come next summer. We'll hit as many as we can find, and like I said, we'll probably miss some, and it's gonna be pretty lush in here next summer, I think.